I'll pass it over to one last session before our break. Michael Richards and James Bush to talk about the design principles for the Mojaloop platform. Go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, so this is rather a departure from what we've been talking about the last couple of days. This is not so much a technical question as a question about how we engage, or how we can better and more easily engage a wider community of technical people in the overall efforts of the Mojaloop platform. Now, I'll be acting as the glamorous assistant in this to Professor Bush, who is, as all of you will know, the head of the Design Authority. So, moving right along. You may remember, those of you who were here on Monday, that one of the objectives overall for the community this year is to attract or grow new constituencies of contributors. And what we want to talk about in this presentation is making it easier for people to make technical contributions. Now, the technical community that's contributing to the Mojaloop project has grown, I guess it would be fair to say, relatively slowly. Most of the people who are making contributions now have been involved with the product from the beginning or quite soon thereafter. And one of the things that I think we need to do, well, I think on behalf of the community that we need to do, is to make it easier for new people to join in and start contributing. So, it is about the right-hand side of the Mojaloop Foundation organisation, the TGB, the Design Authority, and less important for this presentation, the Change Control Board. So I want to start off by just talking a little bit about how those three entities fit together in the Mojaloop Foundation. So the Technical Governing Board basically is the technical oversight body for all of the work, technical work that is, that's conducted within the organisation. It actively canvasses a diversity of perspectives and approaches about the technical work at hand. It looks at the possible ways of doing things and makes recommendations. And it essentially makes the decisions regarding technical direction and has the final approval for technical program activities that are done within the mission itself. I mean things like code release decisions, standards document approvals, and very important, the authorization of code maintainers, the people who are allowed to actually approve and make changes to the main branch of the Mojaloop product. Change Control Board basically is responsible for the APIs which provide access to the platform. Now, all sorts of people use those APIs. We've been talking a lot this morning about DFSPs, participants of various kinds, but PISPs also have their own set of APIs that we're currently developing. And of course, hub administrators and hub operators have ways of interacting with the system as well. And all of those are managed through standard and published APIs. The Change Control Board doesn't do a great deal on its own account, but it coordinates the work of the individual special interest groups which work on individual APIs in the Mojaloop family. So that is things like the core API, the PISP API, the settlement API, all of those sorts of things. And I would encourage everybody who is here and may be interested in those areas. We have special interest groups. They meet regularly. They are open to all. And please get in touch with me if you are interested in attending any of them. The Change Control Board also ensures that APIs within the Mojaloop family have a family resemblance to each other, i.e. that people don't go off and do the same thing in different ways, that people can reuse each other's work, all of those sorts of things. So the Design Authority is there essentially to ensure, well, when I say a uniform architecture, I mean an architecture that's as uniform as it can be in the areas where it needs to be. Again, we don't want, if possible, to do the same thing in lots of different ways, because that's going to make life more difficult for everybody to understand how the product works, to contribute to enhancing it, all of those sorts of things. It also forms a channel for bringing new technical ideas which respond to new product requirements to design and verification. And that is to provide a discussion group where people can make suggestions, can propose things, where they can be discussed in a group of other architects, technically astute people, except in the case of myself, who can make suggestions, possibly who understand the intricacies of the Mojaloop product better than the people who are bringing the ideas. It defines overall technical strategies, and it verifies that designs which are submitted to the design authority are aligned with architectural standards. It also drives, publicizes, and advertises, I should say, preferred design methodologies. So where we are saying this is a Mojaloop way of doing things, it's the design authority which is tasked with making sure that people who are involved in designing individual parts of the system know about those methodologies, know about those decisions. And it also provides resources to advise on productive design in the Mojaloop context. So if you're thinking of adding functionality to the Mojaloop product, then by all means, we are always happy in the design authority for you to get in touch with us and say effectively, I'm thinking of doing this. How do you think it fits in with the Mojaloop overall architecture? What would be the best way of doing it? Can you make suggestions as to how this proposal might be improved? That sort of thing. It doesn't matter how early in the process it is, we're interested to know about it. So the question, as I said before, is how can we help new members of the technical community to contribute as quickly and productively as they possibly can? Well, there are, first of all, people who want to integrate with a Mojaloop platform. Now, we talk a lot about onboarding, but there's, I want to say, a thing beyond onboarding, which is how most productively a third party can integrate. And when I say third party, I mean, could be a bank, could be a mobile money operator, could be an MFI, could be any sort of organization, how they can best integrate with the Mojaloop product to do the things that they want to do. Which parts of what they want to do can it already do? Where would it need to be modified? And if it does need to be modified, where would be the best place to modify it? So those are all questions that people who want to integrate with a Mojaloop platform will need to answer. There are also people who want to start and run a Mojaloop platform, i.e. schemes. So they will need to say, in my particular scheme, I need to do these sorts of things. How can I do them? And a technical conversation with the design authority can help them to understand, again, whether Mojaloop currently supports what they want to do, whether it would need to be extended, and if so, where would be the best place and the best way of extending it, and so on. Then there are people who want to add new functional areas to the Mojaloop platform, who want to make Mojaloop do things that it doesn't do already. And they, again, will need to integrate those things, or won't need to, but they probably will get more benefit if they do, integrate those things with the way in which the Mojaloop platform works now. And finally, there are people who want to extend or enhance the existing functionality of the Mojaloop platform. And here I'm thinking, for instance, of things like the Tiger Beetle product that we're going to be hearing about later on today from the Coil guys. Now, this is something which does something that already happens in the Mojaloop platform, but in a better, more efficient, much more effective way. And we're always going to be looking, as we evolve the Mojaloop product, as it's used in more places for more purposes, of ways of improving the core functionality so that it's cheaper, faster. So there are those things as well. Now I'm going to hand over to Mr. Bush who will talk about the Mojaloop evolution model as we see it.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. So this wonderful diagram that Michael's drawn for us, I think illustrates quite nicely the various pathways that that exist at the moment for the evolution of the Mojaloop product itself. And you can see over on the left-hand side the various sources of new functional requirements, people who want to adopt the platform, as Michael said, people who already operate a Mojaloop platform, and there are some, plus many other different types of organization around the world who might have an interest in making Mojaloop something that works with their world. So once those functional requirements start to evolve, we're hoping that now the product council has been convened. Many of those will go through the product council, but that doesn't necessarily always have to be the case. So the top line, you can imagine, might be somebody who has a very specific or particular set of use cases that they don't think or don't want to consider potentially donating back to the community, and I think we're mostly fine with that. We hope it won't happen, but it potentially could. But at various points along these processes, the design authority, with their high-level guidance and the set of architectural guidelines and specifications and dare I say even restrictions applied by the TGB can be brought to bear to ensure that what we end up with towards the right-hand side of the diagram is something that is coherent and follows similar design methodologies and implementations with a view to making the software more consistent for both developers, users alike. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please, Michael?
Nothing would give me greater pleasure.
So the obvious places where you might think conversation with the design authority would be appropriate are highlighted here. So whether a functional requirement has gone through the product council or not, the design authority is there and available to provide guidance and help to anybody who might ask for it as to what the best way or the various options, the trade-offs might be to implement any particular set of requirements. Next slide, please, Michael. Obviously, during real-world development, software engineers face a reality that isn't necessarily completely understood during the design phase. Issues come up during the coding process that weren't considered during a design phase. However experienced or thorough the people analyzing those designs might be. So at the point of integration, where we consider bringing those changes back into the master branches of the core product that's there for anybody to come and use, the design authority has a role to ease those back into the wider system in that coherent way, to make sure that we don't bring in new components or new architectures that are fundamentally in conflict with those core principles as set by the TGB. Many of you will have noticed, I think, at this point that this looks like quite a waterfall model. And I think on our next slide, you'll see that we do realize that the world is largely agile these days, and we don't need to think about the process of designing and building and integrating new features to Mojaloop as being waterfall. The design authority can be integrated into an agile development process, the same as any other design input might happen in the world of Agile as it does anywhere else. So during sprint iterations, the design authority make themselves available to offer advice and guidance or feedback on sprint reviews as to how well a particular implementation aligns with the overall principles. Thank you, Michael.
Sorry, just making it even more agile than it was before.
More agile. Yeah, so obviously there is a need in agile process, any software engineering process, to validate that what's been built actually meets the requirements that were outlined for it in the first instance. So you'll see Michael has cunningly showed that feedback loop, whereby hopefully new features that get designed and integrated go through some kind of review process with the product council as a kind of check to make sure that the requirements that were asked for have been delivered, or if they haven't, whether what has been delivered is considered suitable or sufficiently good enough to be accepted into the core product. Thank you, Michael. So, all that having been said, how can these people who are new to our community get up to speed and start being productive and contribute as fast as possible and get the most value out of Mojaloop as they can as quickly as possible? Well, as we've seen already this week, there's a really good set of training materials available now to bring people up to speed in some great depth of technical detail, actually, I might add. During our regular convenings, as those who've been around for a while might know, those who are new, we do always discuss at great length and in great detail the current and planned functionality of the platform, which gives everybody who might be new to the community a good chance to come and understand what's being proposed and how that fits in the context of the overall program and what might already exist. There's a number of channels by which the design authority can be reached. I mean, it sounds like quite a high and mighty group of people, but really it's a bunch of very friendly engineers who are happy to talk. So come and join us on Slack. There's a public design authority channel. You can see it there on the Mojaloop Slack workspace. The DA manages a backlog of issues that it works through using GitHub issues, and you can see a link there into the Mojaloop organization on GitHub. The design authority repository there has all of the issues in that backlog that are currently under consideration and discussion by the design authority. There's also a wonderful community page now, facilitated there on that URL, community.mojaloop.io, and there's a category under the governance heading for the design authority, under which we regularly post the agenda items that we're going to discuss. The DA meets weekly, and every week we set an agenda of those items at the top of the backlog that we want to discuss. Very often we don't have enough time in our weekly meetings, so there are a number of spin-off meetings and ad hoc meetings as necessary to discuss whatever somebody might be bringing along for discussion. As I say, it's a friendly bunch of people, and anybody who has the slightest interest, I encourage you to come and join us on Slack and listen to the conversations going on. Thank you, Michael. So Michael did allude earlier in this session to the design principles as being set by the Mojaloop Foundation and the Technical Governance Board. There is a document that's in quite an almost final state, I would say, ready to be released for comment to the wider community, that sets out in some detail what those design principles are. So keep your eyes open for a notification on the community pages and on Slack for when that becomes available. Those of you who've signed up to the mailing list should receive an email when that's out for review. We'd welcome comments and feedback on that. Thank you, Michael. So at this point, I'm going to hand back over to you to tell us a bit more about the principles.
Thank you very much. So the document is like this. First of all, it originated from the Technical Governing Board, and it's designed to set the design parameters within which the design authority operates. So what we wanted was something which the Technical Governing Board could use to guide the discussions in the design authority and make sure that the design authority was responding to the directions that the Technical Governing Board wanted us to go in. So that is for objectives, constraints, requirements, and preferences. I say requirements and preferences because there will always, in architectural discussions, be things that we absolutely do require, things that you must do if you are developing things which are intended to form part of the Mojaloop platform, and also things that, in our belief, when I say our, of course, I have no viewpoint which is separate from that of the Technical Governing Board, but this is actually a viewpoint of the Technical Governing Board. Things that you should do. And if you're not going to do them, you should have a strong reason for not doing them. And the DA, I think it's fair to say, would want to see convincing reasons for why a particular development needs to deviate from those principles, which are things that you should do. The objectives, of course, are the overarching requirements of the platform, the things that are not necessarily technical themselves, but which every technical contribution to the platform needs to further and to support. So the design principles document is also to provide a framework which we can use to evaluate proposed solutions, and also which we can use to explain the way in which we have evaluated them. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is to say the way in which the design authority responds to proposals, architectural development proposals from the technical contributors in the community, is not a matter simply of personal preference or shininess of the toys or anything like that. It's based around principles which are independently articulated and which anybody can look at. And the final thing about it is that we want to provide a simple way for new technical contributors to understand what they need to do to contribute productively to the core product. So the overall objectives are that whatever we do in architectural terms should be consistent with the level 1 principles. We've talked a lot about those, or at least you'd have heard people refer to them a lot, but I just wanted to talk very briefly through this slide to say these are the level 1 principles articulated in a technical context, I think. So it should be an open loop system, i.e. it shouldn't matter what kind of institution you are. You should be able to join and contribute productively to a Mojaloop platform. It should use open and international standards which are which are easy to understand and which anybody, again, can adopt. So there shouldn't be a barrier because you're a particular kind of participant. That means you can't join a Mojaloop system. Payments should be credited directly to their recipients and in real time, which is to say we've talked a lot about immediate clearance of funds, and that's a fundamental architectural question in the system. So everything needs to contribute to the immediate clearance of funds. And payments should be irrevocable. Once it's been credited to a customer's account, only the customer of that account, the owner of that account, can give permission for it to be removed again. You can't have a situation where somebody just goes in and debits a sum with which you were credited. We need to settle quickly, as quickly as possible, because one of the things we're doing is asking people to credit immediately to their customers' accounts. And immediately in this case means typically before they get the funds from the payer's institution. So the amount of time that they are out of pocket effectively should be as short as possible. The platform should be operated by a scheme which has pro-poor governance practices and should be operated by a scheme which is supported and regulated by a government financial authority. That doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that in every case it will be operated by an institution like a central bank, but it does mean that it needs to be regulated properly to ensure that the interest of the customers who use the system can be properly protected. It should use KYC structures to make sure that people aren't cheated, or at least to make as sure as possible that people aren't cheated. And those of you who were around for the fraud and risk management presentation will see the efforts that we're making in that area. And it should be cheap. We don't want this to be something that, that effectively you can only start and join in if you've got plenty of money. We want it to be something that can be used by as many people as possible for the lowest possible fee. And also the platform should support shared investment in scheme and platform services where they can, those sharings can give an advantage to everybody who uses it, and particularly an advantage we mean which makes the system safer or cheaper or faster to use. So that's a very brief statement of what the level 1 principles are. Beyond that, we think that most of the design principles have to do with two main areas. One is security, and one is scalability. I'm going to ask James to join me in a bit of a discussion on these. So security. First of all, we need this platform to be something which can be implemented over the public internet, and particularly something which doesn't require extremely expensive point-to-point communications in order to operate. This is about something which can be secure while still being cheap. We've already said it needs to be open loop. It needs to be something that doesn't require people to be large banks in order to operate successfully. There have to be ways for small institutions to join it and use it productively. It has to have real-time payments, and it has to have a two-phase commit. And the two-phase commit is the way that we guarantee that, that the payment can be done quickly so that the liquidity requirements for the payer are as short as they possibly can be, and which can guarantee that the payee, the institution that received it, really has said, yes, I put my hand on my heart and say I've credited these funds to the payee's account. On the scalability side, there are a number of difficulties here which make it important that we think hard about how to architect these systems. First of all, we want something that is cheap to start. We don't want to have a system which where you have to basically buy a jumbo jet in order to go to the supermarket. We want something that can start in a simple way, and which won't require people to invest, either the hub operators or the participants, to invest greater sums than the current state of the system authorizes or supports. We also want, though, a system that can cope with success, i.e. we want something that if the system takes off and suddenly starts having very large numbers of participants and very large numbers of transactions, that there is a clear way to scale the system pardon me, so that it can cope with very large volumes, and there needs to be a defined roadmap so that people understand how to move from the point where they start to the point where they succeed. So those are the areas that that we think most of the contents of the design document really talk about. I see I jumped on and tripped over my own slides.
Yes.
So yes, in particular, bits that I didn't talk about, it breaks down, the system we want to see breaking down into individual services so that, again, people don't have to implement and support services that they don't need, where the service is self-contained and can be implemented separately, where resources are shared where that's advantageous, i.e. where there are underlying single services which can provide services to a number of other services, and which follows the dictum, as we say, of Einstein, which is that everything should be made as simple as possible. This really talks a little bit more. Do you want to talk through this, James, about the microservice architecture? We talked about service on the previous slide.
Yes, okay. So, well, let me go through your slide first, Michael.
Sure.
So you did mention that the components need to be deployable independently, and that's important because some deployments, some schemes, some implementations may not all need exactly the same set of services. There might be things that you can leave out if you don't require certain use cases, or you already have those services provided by some other facility at the time of deployment. Components should run separately. The separation of software functionality into service-oriented fashion is a pattern that enables many plus points. There are some downsides as well, but the scalability question leads us to a conclusion that in order to have that as near linear possible as possible scalability, you have to do your work, or an effective way of delivering that is to do your work in a partitioned way. So by adding more processing nodes, you're able to cope with more work. So that's a scale out versus scale up architecture. Some of you may have come across those two terms. So this microservice architecture and service orientation in general tends to facilitate that kind of scalability. Components should communicate with each other using standard protocols and documented, well-defined interfaces. Well, we've already heard the Mojaloop APIs are managed and governed by the change control board. The protocol set that's been decided upon, JSON over HTTP, essentially, was chosen because it's pretty much de facto the way common open source and closed source software technology is built these days. The skills in software engineers around the world are largely focused on building services that talk over the internet using these components these days. So the barrier to entry for developers coming to the project is quite low as a result. The tooling around those protocols is very good, developer tooling, test tooling, for example. And there's plenty of training material around there for people who can quickly come along and understand how our services talk to each other. The final point there can be contentious. Each component should be responsible for persisting its own state. One view is that for services to share state in a microservices architecture is an anti-pattern, and that's usually the case. If you share state, you can get yourself in some messes and tie yourself in knots, and changes to one part of a state persistence model, a database schema, for example, can cause ripple-on changes throughout many components. So we're trying to keep strong separation of responsibility between the services in the system. That's what we're trying to say there.
Going to have to rush you, I'm afraid, James. We are over time.
Sorry, do you have another slide?
I do, but I think we're going to probably allow people to read these things on the thing and wrap the discussion up at this point, because I'm very conscious that we're keeping people from, well, we're probably keeping Miller from his breakfast. And we're keeping people who have been concentrating hard over this morning from their...
It's a shame, because those last few points are well worth discussing, but yes, Miller's breakfast takes precedence.
I think so. So thank you very much.
Excellent.